Are we going to wait till 7:15 or you want to get started?
Ready to go? All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm very delighted to welcome everyone to Bird and Beckett Bookstore. We have three extraordinary women travelers today who are not only intrepid adventurers who've done many improbable things we can all just contemplate with jaws dropping, but they're also very astute commentators on their adventures. So we're looking forward. They're going to introduce themselves for the most part. Their books are available here, so we expect everyone to buy at least one copy of each, of course.
And they'll be signed.
And they'll be signed. Yeah.
Oh. By whom?
Yeah.
Does anybody have a pen?
By random passers-by, but that's fine.
I've been deciding a lot.
You know, and there's refreshments that everyone should take advantage of as well. So thank you all for coming, and we're looking forward to a memorable evening.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Right.
Well, I'm Diane LeBow, and I'm the third reader, but I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to introduce MJ. Thank you so much to the bookstore and the bookstore people, and for you all intrepid travelers to come out here. I live the other side of the city, so it was an adventure. It was like coming to a new country.
Yes.
It's really beautiful here. So, okay, MJ Pramik.
Here we go.
Mary Jean Pramik has hitchhiked. How's the sound, by the way?
Amazing. Melodic.
Uh-oh, it's my voice. MJ has hitchhiked across the United States and fended off bill collectors in tropical San Francisco. MJ earned undergraduate and graduate degrees in biological sciences and completed an MFA in writing. She moonlights as a medical writer. Her articles and essays have appeared in Nature, Biotechnology, and Cosmetic Surgery News, Good Housekeeping, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the National Enquirer. She's contributed to the Traveler's Tales Venturing In series and Wanderland Writers anthologies. She's won several Solus travel writing awards for her travel essays. She's the author of Travels on the Edge, One Woman's Journeys on a Runaway Planet, a collection of her travel essays and reflections of travel on a burning planet. She's currently working on a novel, Gem of Egypt. Communicating with screeching penguins in Antarctica and swimming with sharks in South Africa remain high points of her sojourn on this planet. So, I give you MJ.
Thank you. Now we're changing seats. Here you go. There's something here. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just good to see everybody. I'll start off making my comments. I didn't bring a copy of my card, which is on your seats. Thank you, Matthew. The card that I have is on the back. I have a series of how to make a difference, for climate change and travel at the same time. And my manifesto, as I call it, is travel with a purpose to sustain the natural world, travel selectively. There's something unique about each destination. Do slow travel, longer stays, less flights. And if you can get there by any other way than an airplane, do that. Because the airline industry and a flight is probably one of the biggest causes of carbon all over the place. Yeah, I think there was a recent article, interestingly enough, that said that the carbon dioxide from the iCloud is now competing with the airlines industry. So we have other things to worry about. I've been looking into carbon offsets where you buy a tree or give somebody some money it's kind of an iffy situation.
Cow farts.
Yeah, but sometimes it doesn't work either. So most the important thing is to cut our carbon dioxide emissions somehow. everywhere. Electric vehicles is one way. And one of my other comments, like when you travel, check the weather before you go, because it could be not what it says in the guidebooks. There are just storms. There's the last time I was about a year ago. I was in Palestine, Israel, Jordan, and Egypt, and we had to spend 3 days in Cairo, Egypt, because our boat could not do the Suez Canal because of the storms on the Mediterranean Sea. It was like surreal. It's like, what? So things are affecting each other. So definitely check the weather, check the State Department, but don't always believe what they say, because they're just, they're hysterical sometimes. So that's okay. Pack light. Be prepared for delays and surprises along the way, always. And on the card I have several sources of ethical travel, community action, Friends of the Earth, the Carbon Almanac. It's not too late. That's a possibility. And then Paul Hawken of Smith and Hawkins, the garden acclaim. He actually has a book out called Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, and it's a compilation of all the things that we can do. So what I would recommend for everybody is to, do one thing. Pick a project and help calm the planet. Recently, I was in Antarctica, and it's amazing. I was there in 2008 and then in 2024. What has happened there is the tour companies, the boats and stuff, have in 2015 got together, and they're organizing how to safely take people to Antarctica. They're going on smaller ships, expedition ships, like the Princess line with 3,000 passengers. They are not allowed to stop anywhere. Yeah, they may be able to float and in and out, but they can't stop, they can't disembark. So the little boats are called expedition boats, and they're like 250 people. And they're trying very hard. There's all these different stopgap measures to clean the environment. Bird flu is down there now. It finally hit Antarctica, and it's very dangerous because it could wipe out the penguins. We can't have that. Penguins are just too cute. So there's a lot of measures going on. I talked to a lot of the researchers who are down there. They're trying to study everything they can to keep it safe, not do over tourism, not trash Antarctica as we've trashed some of the planet. So that's kind of my shtick. Let's kind of keep it calm and nice. And that's kind of what my book is about. I put in my travel essays that I've written over the years, and have a environmental comment at the end, followed by a poem of hope. So I'll read one, which is my pilgrimage to Antarctica from 2008. And I'll start reading. You see, if one is standing still and bareheaded and exhales a deep breath, one can actually hear one's breath freezing a moment or two after it has left the mouth. What one hears I do not precisely know. The sound itself is not easy to describe. It is rather like that produced by the movement of sand on a beach when a wave washes up. And that was by Captain Robert F. Scott, The Voyage of Discovery in 1901, one of the early explorers of Antarctica. My comment was, blinding glare. I felt my pupils shrink to pinpoints. Jagged breath clawed its way down my throat and lungs as minute ice crystals ripped the pink tissue. Blue iridescent surfaces and dazzling white glaciers surrounded me, surfaces that seeming to embed themselves in my chest. The air temperature was a balmy 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Stunned, thrilled, and in acute pain, my breath caved inward. I nearly fell forward down a glacial slide. I felt an instant full-body brain freeze. In a mental fog that often accompanies a pounding illness, I suffered immediate joy and an oh shit nanosecond puncture of my conscious mind. I began a quest to this mass of ice and rock as my first solo pilgrimage. Antarctica defined getting away from it all. A white continent with few human inhabitants and many exotic creatures, the albatross, the penguin, the blue whale. After the recent collapse of my 25-year marriage and the launch of 3 fledgling solo adults, I set out to explore the world. I watched my 91-year-old father sink into old age. I knew I had to jump aboard my life and cast off, now or never. Let's see. I sat with my father gazing out the dining room window at the snow-covered ground in February in Ohio, smiling at his avian menagerie and winter quiet. "I'll bring you back bird stories for you, Dad," I said. Good. Tell me how they behave down there, if they're any different from here," he said. His short-term dementia faded in and out. He could describe vivid events about his 8-year-old self, but not recall what he had for breakfast. On one level, I felt that he knew I'd embarked on my own quest, much later in life than his plunging into the Pacific War Zone in his late 20s. I felt a quiet blessing from him. He didn't have to state it outright. At the end, I talk about Antarctica. Ice mass has diminished by 149 billion metric tons of ice per year over the past few decades, contributing to the rise of the world's sea level. Recent model studies predict a rapid and unstoppable sea level increase by 2050. Of course, that's a long time away. That will continue for hundreds of years into the future, even if kept at the target increase of 2 degrees Celsius. And now we're told that we're probably only going to make it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And I close with this poem, Melting. Brash ice sinking after birth of carved ice. Shelf melting into the sea, its final weather, we. And there are other essays in the book. Who am I introducing?
Me.
Oh, great. I get to introduce Anne, who has speared us into getting together and into this discussion. I'm very grateful. Thanks, Anne. This is Anne Breedlove. After arriving in San Francisco in 1972, Anne has divided her time between working as a graphic artist and an academic. A happenstance event in 1997 opened her eyes to the possibility of bicycling, not just for fun and recreation, but using the bike as a means of travel. In 2008, Anne and her husband, Jim, decided to retire young to travel as much as possible of the world on their bikes as their bodies could handle, visiting 21 countries and pedaling more than 40,000 loaded miles to date, including crossing the Australian Nullarbor and getting stuck in a 38-hour storm in Mongolia. Her first book, Part-Time Nomads, Traveling the World on Bicycle, was released last fall. Anne's master's thesis was published in the California Historical Society Quarterly, March 2001. You can find her travel essays online in Warm Showers newsletter, as well as on her website, annebreedlove.com. And P.S. Anne has also hitchhiked across the United States in 1973, which is interesting because I hitchhiked across the United States in 1972. So we have, similar crossings. So
We could compare our routes.
yeah, right. Your turn.
Okay.
Okay, let me go around.
Thank you.
So in June of 2020, I was taking a writing class through the Writing Salon. It went online, of course, though it was supposed to be at the place on Balboa. And I was reading about the Mongolian storm, the essay, and everybody was confused they couldn't understand almost anything about what I was talking about. And I had an aha moment, and I realized that my first book wasn't going to be about the great adventures that we did after we retired when I was 54 and Jim was 61, but that I needed to tell the backstory of how my husband Jim and I went from being fairly rational, fairly boring, average married couple with 2 kids to deciding the hell with work and let's roll the dice and take off on the bikes. So that's what this book actually is. It tells that story of that transition. And the pivotal event, as MJ said in the introduction, was in June of 1997 when we decided to do something different for our 20th wedding anniversary. We weren't sure what we were going to do, but I'll pick up here in chapter 1. One rainy winter weekend, while browsing Moe's books on Telegraph Ave in Berkeley, I spied a bicycling magazine. Perusing the classifieds, I found a tiny 3-line ad for a self-guided French bicycle tour. It was a mom-and-pop operation. Self-guided meant they booked our accommodations, provided the equipment, and transported our stuff. All we had to do was follow the maps and bicycle rural France. It definitely qualified as different, but we were worried how hard it would be. I mean, there's one thing to go out for a ride for a few hours during the day. It's quite another to tour for days on end. Let me see where I am. We spent the spring months leading up to our departure cycling many miles as we could. And then the pivotal evening was we did an 8-day tour. And I'll pick up with the last day, pretty much, of the tour. The second of our 2 special tour dinners was our last night at La Vieille Tour, a farm, lodging, restaurant combination. There was a hitch, though. It was 2 miles away, and we had to get there on our own steam. There were no cars or taxis available deep in the lot. So we dolled ourselves up in our fanciest clothes, smushed out the wrinkles, and bicycled to the restaurant. What choice did we have? We looked around, hid the bikes in some bushes before we waltzed in, no one the wiser. After yet another unparalleled dining experience, 5 courses in 3 hours, we retrieved the bikes to make our way back to the farm. It was twilight, and a strong wind swirled around us, with the moon providing enough light through the passing clouds for us to make our way. Bats flitted about, though we felt their presence more than saw them. Our bike route followed a ridge, so we could make out the hills undulating off into the distance. So entranced by the magic of the evening, we dared not speak. As we neared Madame Odette's farm, a herd of sheep panicked at the clicking sound of our bicycles and bolted, running away from, but parallel to us, a vague, white, floating, agitated mass in a field of dark. We decided that somehow this trip, after we returned, was only a beginning. So we came back to California and decided we wanted to travel this way on our own. And our first trip, we decided we would be credit card camping. And our son was going to Chico, so we decided we would drive up to Auburn, and we left our car in the parking lot of the police station and spent 3 days bicycling in the foothills up to Chico, and then 3 days back. And on the 4th day, we left Chico and we were pedaling through the vast agricultural farmland of the Sacramento Valley. And here, we saw dozens of crops. Many we had no idea what they were. Olive trees were easier to recognize. Sunflowers were a delight. When we saw how close we were to the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge, we routed further west. Here's when Jim's choice of tire, the Schwalbe, came in handy. No racing enthusiast would ride with tires as thick and durable as ours, but they made for slower pedaling and gave us great flexibility on crummy roads. The roads through the refuge were rough dirt and off limits. We skirted the gates and made our way straight down the middle, doing our best to avoid the washboards. We had the refuge to ourselves. Exquisite tracts of marshland on both sides. The place was loaded with so many birds. We stopped for a leisurely picnic lunch, but we pedaled into Calusa several hours later than we planned. It was 6 p.m. on a spring evening, and only to discover that the town of Calusa had no rooms. There were nothing, zip, zilch, nada. When we inquired, we found out that we had to bicycle another 10 miles to the freeway interchange on Highway 5 to find a place to spend the night. It was so ironic. We had spent 4 days cycling rural roads only to find ourselves surrounded by the ugly reality of California car culture. I was the navigator, and now we had to spend an additional 10 miles bicycling in the dark to get to a hotel. So, Jim said on our last day as we got back to our car in Auburn, next trip, let's pack a tent and 2 sleeping bags. I'll do the research and we'll get really, really light ones, and I will carry them. Oh no, I thought, as we left downtown Auburn for the freeway, a man and his toys. How are we going to be able to ride bikes loaded down with so much gear? So the Dordogne led us to try car camping, and not being able to find a place to spend the night led us to buy a tent. And Jim decided that the first place we would try it out with was to bicycle in the east side of Mount Hamilton, south of Livermore. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the East Bay. So we headed to this county campground called Stanislaus County, or called Frank Brains Regional Park. And it had a lovely campground with hot showers. And I'll pick up here. We arrived at a completely empty campground just before 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. We set up our tent and checked out the facilities. The 50s-era cinder block building was well maintained, clean, and had unlimited hot showers. Pretty posh for a county campground. Because it was still early afternoon, we decided to stash our gear in the tent and ride unloaded up to San Antonio Valley Road, which was noted for its fields of wildflowers in the spring. We clipped along the unpopulated valley. Farmhouses were very few and far between, with the fields awash in blue and violet, orange and white blooms. It was so pretty, it was worth the extra miles. Let's see. When we returned to the campground at 5 p.m., the place was packed. Bedlam. Every spot was taken and filled with campers and utility vans of every size and shape imaginable. And the din of motorcycles came down from the hills just beyond the campground. The campground had a huge off-road vehicle park just adjacent, and that weekend was the annual trial bike competition. It was filled with families. I wish I had packed our camera, but it was a monstrous number, too big to carry. Turns out trial bikes are uniquely designed small motorcycles that don't have seats because the drivers must stand to execute the physical maneuvers. Who knew? And this competition was fun for the whole family, for adults as well as children as young as 4. The whole place sparkled from the sun shining on so many metallic surfaces, except for our forlorn campsite. Not one behemoth piece of machinery in it. Our driveway completely empty, our 2 bikes locked at the end of our empty picnic table, and a tent only tall enough for sitting staked in the grass. We were embarrassed by the dramatic difference. The campsites were first come, first served, but somehow we felt we had stolen a spot from a trial bike family. We were pretty much ignored as we sheepishly made our way to the showers. It was clear that except for us, everyone knew everyone. It was a big deal event that felt like a reunion. As we set out our meager picnic lunch to eat, bag of Doritos, Pepperidge Farm cookies, sandwiches, nuts, and fruits, a perky blonde woman, 40-something, in a team t-shirt, denim shorts, and sun visor, carrying a casserole, stopped and looked at us. "Hey," she led, "we're having a potluck in the pavilion. Why don't you join us?" As Jim tried to disappear under the table, I replied, "Oh, but we don't have anything to share." She tilted her head, rolled her eyes, and said, "The kids love Doritos, and you two look like you could benefit from something more substantial. Come on over." After shaping my newly opened bag of Doritos into a bowl on the potluck table, we filled their paper plates with their piping hot food and sidled ourselves to a far corner of the table so we could enjoy the show from a distance. It was such fun watching these enthusiastic, happy families. Ellen, the woman who invited us, stopped by. She lived in the valley, had 3 boys, 11, 9, and 7, said they discovered trial biking through neighbors, and all 5 of them loved it and competed. She said it changed their whole lives once they discovered trial riding. Don't be shy, she said, go back for seconds. After a lighter second serving, we left early and fell asleep just past dusk. We left so early the next morning, none of the campers were up and out yet, but we figured within minutes of our departure, some family would fill in our empty campsite. For our next trip, Jim said on the way home, I think we should buy some cooking gear. How about a stove and a pot, and of course, I will carry it. So, I don't know. Anyway, there's more that I could share, but this is kind of the evolution of how we decided to travel. Oh, and now it's my turn to introduce Diane. Diane LeBow is an award-winning writer and photojournalist. She is the recipient of gold and silver SOLAS awards for Best Women Travel Writing, and she is the president emerita of the Bay Area Travel Writers. Diane's writing has appeared in Salon, Via, Image, Claes, Seal, Shockin', Traveler's Tales, and many other publications. Her numerous honors include a Lifetime Achievement Award from Douglas College for her writing, photojournalism, women's rights work, and as a pioneer of women's studies. Her international photography has been widely published and exhibited. She has trained national champion Morgan horses, been a feminist organizer, and scuba dived with sharks in the Red Sea. Diane has traveled to almost 100 countries. She has spent time with Afghan women, the Hopi, Amazon people, Tuvans, Mongolians, Corsicans, and Parisians.
Thank you. Trying to get over here without falling over or anything. Oh, great. Well, thank you all for being here, and thanks to this wonderful bookstore. It's so cozy. It's like a dream kind of bookstore, isn't it? It's just really lovely. So, okay, well, I have this book called Dancing on the Wine Dark Sea, Memoir of a Trailblazing Woman's Travels, Adventures, and Romance. And people say, what is wine dark? And it turns out that the ancient Greeks didn't really, we believe, we don't really know, we weren't there, didn't have a word for dark blue. So Homer, for example, whenever he described the Aegean Sea, he would describe it in ancient Greek as wine dark. So this book is really kind of my whole life. And one of the benefits of getting older is you have a lot of stories to look back at. And one of my friends recently said, wow, Diane, your life could be a movie. So I've been trying to think of what writing project to get going. And I really haven't written fiction, but maybe I could fictionalize some of these stories. So I just want to give you a little taste of a few different, happens all over the world, this book. And there are copies for sale here, which I will sign. So this is my introduction. Why I didn't stay home. From my earliest memories, I was a rebel with a cause. What was my cause? I didn't exactly know yet, but growing up in the 1950s, I chafed at the restricted roles available to women and girls. One day you'll be a wife and mother and a helpmate to your husband, was a common refrain. While studying pre-veterinary medicine at Penn State, in 1957, I was the only woman in a class of 500. My advisor, a male veterinarian, called me into his office and said, "We don't want you here. You're just going to get married. You're wasting our time. You're taking the space away from a man." Such experiences were common in those years. So I won't read the rest of the introduction, but Now I'll move to a happier scene. So I started traveling the world pretty much by myself, having adventures. And France is one of my favorite places, of course. And this happened in Saint-Tropez. Do you know the writer Colette? French writer, very did it her way type of person and wrote all about it. So this story is called Saved by Colette, Seduction in Saint-Tropez. And my book is kind of a little bit X-rated, but I won't read any of that. So one autumn evening in a restaurant beside the harbor in off-season Saint-Tropez, I sat eating mussels from a large silver bucket. 2 tables away, a handsome and dignified man was similarly sucking the soft bodies from their shells into his mouth. We observed each other licking butter and garlic from our fingers. Blonde, silver-streaked hair hung oddly, somehow too evenly across his forehead. He and the waiter joked back and forth. Apparently he was a regular patron. When he smiled, something lurked just underneath the gentle spread of his lips, the hint of a sneer, perhaps. Beside my plate sat Colette's La Naissance du Jour, break of day, my dinner companion. I was on a 6-month sabbatical from teaching college in Paris, where I'd been living for 2 years, and had just attended an international Colette conference in Saint-Tropez, Colette's home. I was trying to solve a riddle that her writing often tackles: the balancing act between freedom and romantic love, peace of mind, and the insistent sexual urges of a middle-aged woman. Life in France seemed to offer possible solutions to these puzzles. The French accept complex emotions with fewer regrets than most Americans. C'est la vie is more than just an expression. They embrace sensuality and enjoy sex like an extension of a good conversation or meal. Toward the end of dinner, the waiter approached me. "Monsieur wishes to offer you a cognac." I nodded. A large crystal goblet of warmed amber liquid was placed before me. When I raised my glass in acknowledgement to the man sitting at the neighboring table, his blue eyes seemed to spark like a struck flint. His glance shifted almost imperceptibly to my hands, which now cupped the snifter. Then he looked back at my eyes with the slightest hint of amusement. My face heated as I realized that my hands cradled the glass as I might a man's, let me use the French love metaphor, delicacies. Madame, I warned you, Madame, would it be too presumptuous on my part if I were to ask to join you at your table? Je m'appelle Jacques. Our conversation flowed along easily, aided by the comfortable setting, the lovely meal, cognac, and something more, la séduction, as the French would say, not referring simply to a direct and perhaps crude sensual drive, but rather a central lubricant of life, the tantalizing impossibility of ever quite comprehending the otherness of the man, of the woman. Perhaps it's a metaphor for the destined final futility of getting inside the other's skin. Enter as we will through as many of the body's apertures as possible. Still we remain solidly alone. I learned that Jacques had lived in Saint-Tropez much of his life. Sailing was one of his passions, and he would be hosting the judges for the Festival of the Tall Masts, an international gathering of antique sailing vessels from around the world that would begin within a few days. Perhaps you would like to watch the competition from my yacht. All the judges will be sailing with me. I found myself staring at his thumb. There are many ways of sizing up the measure of a man. For me, the thumb never fails. His thumb was broad, moderately long, but its breadth and overwhelming sturdiness and girth were breathtaking. I had to remind myself to exhale. It is still quite early. If you have no pressing plans, I could show you around the harbor. We could stroll over to my yacht. And I'm not going to read beyond this. So moving to a different mood, a different country. Women in Morocco, up against the wall but laughing together. The smells of spices, hot coals, and sizzling food tantalized my nostrils. As I walked around the Jama El Fna, the enormous plaza in Marrakesh, a woman in black slipped in beside me. Surrounding us were jugglers, fortune tellers, acrobats, child boxers, snake charmers, and transvestites. All this receded as the woman in black stared deeply into my eyes. I said something to her in French, but she answered in a mixture of French, Arabic, and English. Totally covered from head to foot, only her penetrating eyes and etched cheekbones were visible. She stood so close to me that I could feel her breath and smell the scents she wore in her body. She might have been, probably was, both thief and prostitute. Yet somehow I liked her and trusted her immediately. We both made some joking references to ourselves as women in a male-centered world. Women are zero, she hissed in Morocco, forming a zero with her thumb and first finger for emphasis. I heard that the king is making good reforms, I said. The king doesn't know what is really going on here. His people keep the truth from him. It is really terrible here for women. My husband was a keef addict. Beat me, and knocked my teeth out. She opened her mouth and snapped her false teeth. I get arrested for trying to sell things in the plaza. Now I'm pregnant. In addition to everything else, my ex-husband was a bisexual and HIV positive. I live in the Medina. My son is in Italy. Why don't you get out of here? I asked. I have no visa, no money. I'm not allowed to speak to tourists or sell anything without a license. I could never get one. Her bloodshot eyes teared up. She slipped an obviously fake silver bracelet onto my wrist. A hustle, no doubt, but a worthy one. I slid 300 dirham, about $30, into her hand. She was doing what she could to survive. On the edge of the crowd, a police car appeared. When I turned back to her, she had evaporated into the dusk of the teeming plaza. And then I'm going to change the mood a little bit. When I was, when as I've worked for women's rights all my life, and the Taliban are like the worst nightmare, for women. I was living in France when the Taliban took over, and I met some Afghan women who were living in exile there, and together we organized a conference to help the Afghan women rewrite their constitution with a declaration of the essential rights of Afghan women that in fact did get written, got signed by Kofi Annan from the United Nations, Bill Clinton, and the following year I went to Afghanistan and was the only American actually there. I gave a little speech at the conference in itself. But this was when I met, we met, the helicopter that was sent for us to fly into Kabul was shot down. So we didn't get to go to Afghanistan. We had the conference in Tajikistan, which is just close by. And at the conference, a few things happened to me. I guess I still have time. I'll read a little bit from it. After a short speech I gave as an American educator and writer concerned about the Afghan situation regarding women's rights, people lined up to speak with me. They expected that as one of the 3 Americans at the conference, I could work miracles. Their desperation made me wish that I could. Please help us. My family in Afghanistan is starving. My brother needs eye surgery. Can you help us get him to a hospital in France or in the US? My sisters and mother have been taken prisoner by the Taliban. Please help me find them. Why can't America stop Pakistan from continuing to fund the Taliban? So I met around the clock, really, with all these different women and heard their stories, but then I'm just skipping along here. One afternoon outside the meeting hall, the face of one woman especially intrigued me. As I looked at her on that sweltering day, Sophia, in a black dress and coat, formed a slight figure. Probably in her 20s, her gaunt face and dark hair peeked out from under her black and tan headscarf. Her large eyes had a tragic, almost hypnotic stare. I introduced myself in simple French and English. As we talked a bit, Sophia explained her situation. My sister died 3 months ago. My husband is in southern Tajikistan trying to find work. I'm living with my brother-in-law and taking care of his 3 children. Before we parted, she invited me to dinner that evening at her family's home. Not thinking about possible risks, the opportunity to spend time with the family and get away from the hotel where we were staying appealed to me. About 8 p.m., her brother-in-law, Mohammed, picked me up at the hotel. Dressed in tan slacks and a white shirt, he explained that his business, exporting flour and sugar, enabled him to support his family and to escape from Afghanistan over the border into Tajikistan. Making our way along the dimly lit, empty streets, as we neared each intersection, Mohammed flattened the gas pedal to the floor. We flew past the police, who were stationed on each of the 4 corners of every block. They are out each evening and stop anyone they feel might give them a good bribe, he explained. A breakaway state from the former Soviet Union, Tajikistan's supposed democracy is at best corrupt and at worst very much a police state. After about 10 minutes, we parked beside a Soviet block-style cement apartment house. We walked up 3 flights of uneven and broken stairs in the pitch black. Sophia, who met us out front, held fast to my hand and guided me up 1 step at a time. No, there are no lights, they apologized. The sweat was running off me in the heat. It occurred to me that I hadn't told anybody from our group where I was going. We'd been warned not to wander around the town at night. People were living under desperate conditions here. Was I about to be kidnapped? I thought about turning and running back down the stairs, but where would I go? I had no idea how to get back to the hotel. Instead, the door opened to a brightly lit and spacious apartment, clean but sparsely furnished with overstuffed black velvet chairs and a couch. A tiny elderly woman, hunched over with osteoporosis, but still spry and cheerful, whom they introduced as Appa, or Grandma, planted kisses on both of my cheeks. They all ushered me in, the children hugging and kissing me. We sat in the living room and talked. For a moment, now and then, a wave of intense grief would cover one face or another. Then that person would rejoin us in the moment, hospitable toward this new friend, eager to enjoy some momentary pleasures. Appa brought out platters of her special chicken kebabs with Kabili pilau. And you can get Afghan food here on Hillman Restaurant on Van Ness. I just had Kabili pilau there the other night. The ubiquitous and delicious Afghan rice dish, a mixture of raisins, lamb, nuts, and local spices, accompanied by fresh tomatoes, cucumbers, peaches, and watermelon. No one bothered about the flies crawling on the chicken or the ants on the watermelon. These people have been through so much as refugees of war, bereft of a sister, a wife, a mother, yet they relish moments of love and happiness. And I'm going to move along here. They asked about my family and life. When they learned that my family had been dead for some years, that I was single and had no children, their eyes misted over with sadness. "You must be lonely," they said. After a few minutes, Lita took my hand. "Take me home with you. Please adopt me." She was a young 12-year-old. I smiled, thinking she was teasing, but when I looked up at her family's faces, I could see that they all approved of the idea. "Then you won't be alone," Sophia said. I told them I was very touched, but didn't know if I could do this. As I was leaving, they pressed various gifts into my hands, including a beautiful woven blue and brown scarf to remember us. "I'll send you gifts from the States," I promised. "Sometimes packages get through," they said. As I flew back to Paris and the following year returned to the United States, I continued to carry with me not only the scarf, but a memory of how love and human fortitude prevail all over the globe in areas we barely know exist. And I've stayed in touch with Sveta all these years. She got a visa to China. She got her MBA in China, and but the last year or two I haven't heard from her, so I don't know where she is. So I'm going to stop.
Good.
Thank you all. I can't. Yeah. So we can have a Q&A.
Yeah, anybody have anything to say? Yes.
Yeah.
Did you become a veterinarian?
No, I didn't. I became a math major for a while because I didn't want to do any girly stuff, but I always loved literature and writing. So I became an English major, and finally I did my doctorate in the history of consciousness, the history of feminist consciousness at UC Santa Cruz. And I taught college for 35 years and ran women's programs and caused disruption in the American curriculum, helped get more ethnic and women's materials in the curriculum. The Ford Foundation sponsored me and used my work around the country. But I loved horses, and I trained Morgan horses. And I had a feminist mare, very feisty mare, and we beat stallions. Matthew.
I have a question for Anne. You mentioned how you were sort of normal, and I forget the terms that you used before you retired early and started biking. How is the Anne pre-biking and post-biking different?
Oh my gosh, it's dramatic actually. I really feel, I think there's one thing that goes on. No, I'm okay. I think there's one thing that goes on with women is, particularly if you marry and have children, you're putting in a couple decades where you're always doing and thinking about others, and then finally we get to be old enough that we get to do whatever we want. And I just feel like I benefit from putting myself first, but also the experiences that I was fortunate in that I married a man who our strengths complemented one another. What he was good at, the machinery and the equipment, and it's in the book, but I didn't get into it tonight. I'm no good at, and what I was good at, navigating and planning, he was no good at. When I did write about Mongolia and people didn't understand it, most people didn't believe that we would travel to these places, just the two of us. But our strengths complemented each other to the point that we really were able to be a team that worked. And it was us against the world. And it was a 38-hour storm in Mongolia where we decided to abandon our tent that was falling apart. I wrote a letter to our children in the journal saying, if you're reading this, I'm really sorry for fucking up, excuse my French. And then we survived. And to do those kinds of, and it started out as baby steps, first credit card camping and not having a place to stay, and then not having food to eat, And you know, we did it step by step, but we got to the point where we took off and did all these things, just the two of us, and I could just feel it in the fiber of my body that I am a significantly more confident and comfortable person moving around in the world for the physical and mental challenges that we took on, the two of us, and did them. There's also a kind of, I think they use the word endorphin or something like that, that when you engage in something that is so physically challenging that it takes you to your knees and you survive and then you get up, it's, well, actually, one of our nicknames for each other was He-Man and She-Ra. I don't know how many of you had kids that was popular when that show was on television, but, you know, we did come to feel that way. And I just feel thrilled and blessed that I'm old enough to survive these things and to write about them and to continue to be here and relish what I do every day. So yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up to MJ?
Yeah, what?
Because it's interesting to compare your situations, because you're going with your husband and you guys decided to do this, and it seems to me that what you said is that you kind of started traveling after the breakup of your 25-year relationship. So I'm just curious how travel sort of helped you with your emancipation and kind of what you've learned about yourself as an individual
Right.
from that.
Well, initially, my ex-husband and I had the same plan,
Okay.
you know, as Anne and her husband. And then it was like, oh, well, if I want to travel, I'm going to have to do it myself. What could I do? And I started out with my dad's essay, but talking about him, but he kind of gave me the independence. When I wanted to move to California from Ohio after graduate school, I remember it was snowing outside. He was watching the bird feeder as usual, and he said, "You're not going to California." I said, "I'm going to California." "You're not going to I mean, I was 22. "I'm going to California." And I just kind of had to say, I'm doing it, and I had to do it. I still have trepidation before a trip, or if I'm out by myself. I was thinking on a recent trip to Yoapa, it's hard for me sometimes to even go out of the hotel room. But then I go, well, I can't stay here. You know, this is ridiculous. I got here, so I've got to go explore it and talk to people. And
May I ask what the fear is, given how much you've traveled?
I don't know.
Interesting.
I mean, I've talked to other travelers, and it's kind of like, oh, that first step, just going out the door. It's, you know, I'd go eat by myself. Well, that means I got to know the word for food. I've got to, you know, just basic human fear.
And yet you do it.
And I do it. Yeah. Just, hey, Jim.
I have a question for MJ.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that the megaships are not allowed to land in Antarctica.
Yeah.
But isn't even 250 people, isn't that going to have a negative impact?
Yeah, there are all these articles. When I got back, I read. I mean, there are tons out there that these kind of trips. I mean, any kind of human stomping on the Antarctic continent or all the ice is going to have some kind of a negative impact. But if there's an organization that can kind of get together and calm it down and say, okay, we can't do that. What they do actually, this international travels tourism group, they talk to each other and they say, well, okay, I'm going over here, you go over there, because if 5 ships go over here, not a good thing. So they kind of divide it up just to appeal to their clientele. And right now, the Antarctic trips are really expensive. I mean, they're, you know, they're 20,000, 30,000 a person for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And so they're trying to, I mean, yeah, it's messing up the planet. And even some of the researchers down there is kind of tilting the, you know, the continent too. I mean, it was like what they told us on the tour was, do not pick up that feather. It might have bird flu on it. And I was like, whoa, I never thought of that. I was collecting feathers, I was collecting rocks. So, I mean, the concept of the science and preserving what is there, I mean, it's trying to be instilled in the passengers so that they can take it back and say, okay, you know, we need to be kind to the whole earth and not destroy what we can. I mean, so that's the whole idea, is to get a consciousness about when you travel, leave the feather on the ground. You know, it's going to be hard because there's a book out called Don't Even Think About It, and what it is about is the human mind can't comprehend climate change, climate crisis. It just can't go there because it can't look ahead that much into the future. And people just don't think so. That's why I'm putting out these little cards. And, I mean, before you go, just think. I have one colleague, Jeff Greenwald, who's for ethical travel. And one of the points is, do you really have to go on this trip? I mean, who thinks, you know, we need to consider everything. So, yeah, it's not going to be pure. So.
Anybody else?
Diane, you've been to 100 countries. Are we over? Is that the end of the time?
No, we have-
there's still time.
So
We
there
have-
was
we have
nothing
an-
happening. I didn't know.
We have another hour, actually.
No, it's
Hour?
9. No, it's 9 o'clock.
Bedtime.
It was 8 o'clock.
Oh,
We got another hour.
Yeah.
really?
Wow.
It's only 8? Oh, wow. Okay, okay.
What were you? We have one more question.
No, I was just gonna say you've been to 100 countries. If you had to choose one of the 100,
Oh,
and
come
why?
on.
Well, I get asked this a lot.
I did.
Well, France, of course. And I lived there for a number of years. I get off a plane in France and my shoulders drop and I relax and I take a deep breath and yeah, it's the way of living. I was going to talk too about traveling as a single woman. It's the night before I left that I always felt it's like being on a high diving board, diving into an ice cold pond. And then once I get on the plane, I'm fine. And then once I get off the plane, I meet new people. Wonderful things just happen to me. Sometimes I didn't read. I have Gems Among the Ruins, a story I wrote about disastrous things that happened. And often good things come out of that. Like when I was chloroformed and robbed on an Italian train. So and travel changes. The world has changed, as MJ is talking about. Too many people are traveling now. Everybody has their fucking bucket list. I hate that expression.
Me too.
And you know, we were fortunate, those of us who traveled earlier, that not that many people were traveling. So what did you ask?
You
Of which country?
You answered it. You answered it.
France.
I'd like to put in my 2 cents on that.
Yes.
Of all the places I've been to, I only fell in love with 2 countries that I did that. We had a great time in a lot of places, and I really liked a lot of places. But 2 countries I fell in love with being there, having no idea what they were like when I got there the first time. And the first one was France. And the reason for that was when we went there the first time is it was so easy to be poor in France and still have a terrific time. We could get a killer dinner of very small portions, 3 or 4 courses that just to die for like $5 a person in the 70s. And everything about everything about the way their society is set up is set up about enjoyment and pleasure and having it be available for everybody. It's not like some people shop at Whole Paycheck and other people shop at Walmart. It's more equitable. And the funny thing that happened is it happened again to me when we traveled in Japan. I call Japan the France of Asia because they have a similar sensibility there about loving things that are beautiful, about wanting things to be arranged in a way that is beautiful and people can really enjoy them. And the food, the great food is there for everybody, not just for the people, the rich people. And it was the same thing there. And those two countries just, I'd go back to in a heartbeat.
I want to add Afghanistan too, not right now, but I've had wonderful times in Afghanistan. The people, even the men, are lovely, not Taliban, and they're very friendly, and it's interesting experience for all of us to be somewhere where often most of the people are not literate. They live in little villages, but they have their family, their love, their music, their food. They enjoy the basic things of life every day, and it makes you realize you don't need everything that we have in order to have a contented life. As I didn't read the one story where the one man that I spent time with his family, and he was so jolly. I said, "How can you be so happy? You've been shot at. You've been in war for 23 years." And he said, "Diane, we have peace now, and peace is everything." Of course, that's not true anymore. But, traveling to some of these other countries gives you a better view of who we are and what we can do with our lives.
MJ, do you have a country or two that are yours that really, really resonated?
Yes, Antarctica, because there are few people there, but lots of penguins.
You love the penguins.
I love those penguins. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I was in a penguin colony where, they tell you don't get within 5 feet of the penguins. Well, they're right there. They come up to you and they talk to you, and they go and it's like they go crazy, and it's like there's this whole group of humans, but they're penguins going, running around, screaming, yelling. But I also liked Mongolia because I lived in a land preserve for 2 weeks, and we did. I was like citizen scientist working with the scientists, but I got to interview all the people who work there: the cook, the person who cleaned the toilets, the drivers, and they all got their whole thing was, well, who's going to take care of you when you get older? Which child? Let's figure out which child you can live with. I mean, they really cared. The caring, it was amazing. We sat there for hours, and I was with the chief scientist, who is Ghana Wangard, she's affiliated with the Denver Zoo Foundation, and that's how she can do the research work in Mongolia, and she's amazing. But it was like they all had to figure out my life, and it was just very, very wonderful, and it was like being back home in Ohio 50 years ago, where people cared about who did what to each other. And I mean, they were just great. And then, I do have the story it's called the Mongolian Disco, because we had to go to a disco, which was this room in the middle of nowhere by some camels, by a spa, and we had to dance. And she made each one of those guys dance with each one of and it was so cute. They were teaching us how to do the dance, and I learned that Mongolians, in order to graduate from high school, have to learn 4 basic dances: the waltz, the polka, the foxtrot, and the tango. Who knew? It was
Very Mongolian.
Yeah, very Mongolian.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah, very wrong.
But they all could dance.
That was our experience there too. When we finally got out of the storm, it was these 2 sisters in this beat up, decrepit town that took us into their home.
Right.
They had an outhouse out back. They got 2 hours of electricity a day from 8 to 10 o'clock at night. They had no running water, and they took us into their home when we were just a wreck from the storm.
Yeah, I had a Mongolian storm story too. The first night we were out there and our tents blew away. We were in the middle of a sandstorm. But then I was on a horse trek across the steppes, and they do throat singing there. And throat singing just comes out naturally. Like I'd be riding along beside a man, oh, and then just do this wonderful throat singing. It's Mongolia is a wonderful,
Yeah, no, actually, our guys would sing. They're just out there singing.
right?
Everybody
Diane,
sings.
could you perform your favorite throat singing
Yeah,
song?
right.
Yeah, I do.
Make her
Yes.
She's not gonna do it.
Yeah. I was going to say something about Mongolia, but I forgot what it was. I know. What the reason I went there is that some of the archaeology that's gone on there has found perhaps evidence of the Amazons, the warrior women. They found bones that showed these people from thousands of years ago were horse people because their legs were bent and they were female, and they were buried with weapons and valuable things. So my story is about being out in the steppes and meeting a young woman equestrian who really wanted to get out of there. She kept hugging me, and when we left, she wanted to come with me because it was kind of restricted, if you're out there and intelligent and want to get some education. But she was a horsewoman and maybe a descendant of the Amazons. Any other questions? Thank you all for coming.
Yes.
We have books for sale, and we'll all happily sign.
We have drinks and snacks too.
Drinks
if you
and
want
snacks.
something before you
I
go.
brought my special brownies that are over there.
I do too, yeah.
I'm gonna get my, I need help.
What?